In the tapestry of life, where every thread holds a story, America in Black and White emerges as a haven for the voices echoing through the heart of our communities. In this podcast, we wade through the rivers of our collective experiences, celebrating the vibrant hues of change brought forth by the whispers of hope and the roars of action. It's more than just a conversation. It's a journey into the heart of our society, illuminated by the light of those daring to dream and do. Join us, and let your voice be the melody that guides us toward a dawn where every color finds its place in the masterpiece of our shared destiny. Together, let's paint a future brimming with the positives that dwell in our minds and the actions that shape our.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of America in Black and White, where we discuss the issues that plague the underserved and marginalized communities and how we can best help to solve them with resources, as well as some inspiration and some motivation. Tonight, we have a very special show for you guys tonight. And tonight, our guest is going to be Jacques Whitfield and Consulting Limited, a boutique consulting agency that provides coaching and consultation, training and development, and strategic planning for public and private sector organizations. Whitfield is a seasoned human resources and DEIB executive with over 25 years of experience in public and private sector, human resources management, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Whitfield recently retired from his position as a senior practice leader for DEIB with CPS HR Consulting. During Whitfield's tenure as a DEIB senior practice leader, the organization expanded its scope of practice from coast to coast, with a focus in California, Colorado, Texas, Florida, and New York, serving local governments, public education, and state agencies. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you all to Mr. Jacques Whitfield. Hello, sir.
Good afternoon from the West Coast, Charles. It's a pleasure to be here with you again. It's a pleasure to be on your show. Happy New Year to you. Happy Black History Month. Happy all the things.
Yes, most definitely. So before we get started, is there anything you'd like to add to your bio?
Wow, that sounds like a really interesting guy. I'd love to meet him one day. I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. We don't talk about ourselves a lot, but so thank you for that beautiful introduction. I am still having fun doing what I love to do. Working with folks to make the world a better place. And so it's been fun. And I'm glad to be back with you. It seems wow. I know that it's been several months, but it really seems time's been going by so quickly and we've had so many things go on that it seems like I was just with you, but I know in fact, it has been several months.
Oh, yes. And, but I'll tell you this, you're right about how the time does fly and everything. And I know when you was here on the show was more than just intriguing. But, as I asked you, we definitely had to have you back because, in today's times, it's definitely worth discussing, some things that people are probably going to need to get some fruits of understanding and learning how to move forward.
Absolutely. A lot has happened. We've had a national election. We've had a change of presidential administrations. We are, I guess, from my own perspective, I'm not surprised. I am disappointed because obviously I was voting for and supporting someone who was my former senator, the Vice President of the United States. I've been a fan of hers ever since she was the district attorney for the city and county of San Francisco. So I'm still a little bit in my feelings, if that's okay. But I'm sober and clear-eyed and ready to meet the moment.
Yeah.
So yes, let's get into it.
Yes, sir. So let's talk about the consulting first that you do. And let's all start with the higher education side. So, can you tell us
Okay.
how has your experience as Chief Human Resources Officer at Yuba Community College District shaped your approach to DEI and higher education?
Yes, I can, Charles, but can I go back? I'd really like to take it back even before Yuba
Okay.
College. So, my first job in education, I know you and I have talked about this and I've shared with your audience, but my first job ever was seventh grade math teacher. So, I was a middle school teacher in southeastern North Carolina.
Mhm.
I was working in an urban school district. Most of the students that I worked with were what we would say is Title I, so free or reduced lunch, urban populations, challenged populations, and the most amazing humans I have ever encountered in my life. And it's that experience that I had working with the seventh graders at Lumberton Junior High. Let me call them out. and I am very grateful to the administration. I'm grateful to my faculty colleagues who welcomed me because it's the first job I had. Now, I'm from a long line of educators. My mother was a distinguished high school educator. Both my grandmothers were distinguished educators as well. North Carolina public schools and New York City public schools. So that really gave me my introduction into working with folks who, even though we may have looked alike, we had very, very different lived experiences. Some of my experiences, candidly, were similar to theirs because I grew up in a single parent household. My father was incarcerated during my early childhood, and I had many of the challenges that many of my students had. So I certainly could relate to that. And there were things that were also very, very different. I'm a third generation college graduate. Many of the parents of the students that I taught were either they had not gone to college or they were first generation, or they were breaking that barrier, trying to create a better lives for themselves. So I really think it happened there. By the time I was at Yuba College, I had been in the game, so to speak, for quite some time. That was my second stint in public education administration. My first stint, I was the associate superintendent of the Grant Union High School District in Sacramento. I held that position for about 11 years before I got to Yuba College. So by the time I got to Yuba, it certainly perfected. I was able to perfect my tools, but the foundation had already been laid many, many decades ago when I was a classroom teacher.
Okay. So, can you tell us what are the biggest challenges you face in implementing DEI initiatives in higher education institutions?
Absolutely. So the biggest obstacle are, geez, that's a great question. So there's several obstacles. One obstacle is the United States of America, right? Just the being who we are and not being a country that is grounded in truth, even if the truth is uncomfortable. And I believe I shared with you last time, part of my professional experience included working for the U.S. Embassy in Dakar, Senegal. I have studied overseas. When I was in college, I did the semester abroad program at the University of Dijon in France. Before that, even when I was in high school, I was an exchange student to the country of Finland in Scandinavia. So I've always been traveling and visiting other places for people who were very, very different than me. And I just believe that travel to different places and visiting different people is the best education in the world, because it teaches you that now we know that there are 8 billion people on the planet. So there are 8 billion ways of doing things, right? And so but one thing I found about visiting Europe and Africa, those folks had a better handle and grasp on their history, even if it was a painful or uncomfortable history. Whereas in the United States of America, we have not come to grips with the reality of who we really are. Because I believe that the real America showed up in 2016 and the real America showed up in 2024. That's who America is, steeped in white supremacy, patriarchal, all the things that this administration is espousing. People are aghast and, want to act shocked and surprised. But this is the country that we grew up in. And myself, as a seventh generation America, and I have a proud multicultural heritage, not just African American. There are biracial elements on both sides of my family, and there's a reality of who that I'm fully aware and fully cognizant of who we really are, and that is an uncomfortable history. And what I find in the United States, that we really embrace mythology. So both in higher education, and certainly in K-12, we really lean into the mythology of who we are rather than studying the reality of who we are. And I think that embracing of mythology has done us an incredible disservice, because we believe that the people that created this country, we call them the founding fathers, which I can't even begin, it would take, I could spend days on saying why that's not an accurate framing, because if you want to create anything, it takes masculine and feminine energy, and it's really interesting in this country how we always default to the patriarchal lens, as opposed to recognizing you cannot create anything without the feminine. You cannot have a child without having a woman and a man, or it takes two people. And I certainly understand there are two sexes, there are multiple genders, because gender is a social construct. And so we don't know how to navigate those spaces as well. America is this either or, love it or leave it, as opposed to really taking the time to unpack our very complicated and painful history that also has elements of triumph. I think that's the story of Black America. That's the story of the diaspora. Again, we came from great civilizations that, made an imprint on the world prior to 1619, right? Prior to coming to being kidnapped from our native land and brought to the Americas. But our story is a story of triumph. It's a story of not just surviving, but thriving through these very, very difficult times. And most of America is very uncomfortable with that history. So I think that's the main challenge. And then when you look at what has been structural impediments in the United States, especially higher education used to be the exclusive purview of white men. And there were some institutions that allowed women. There were some institutions that allowed people of color, notwithstanding the HBCUs and the tremendous contribution that they gave. But when you look at academic America, it is predominantly white, predominantly male, and so those are the stories and the narratives that we get. And so it's only been within the last 60 to 70 years that there has been room to tell other narratives and other stories that really resonate with people who look like me and you, Charles. So I think the main problems are structural. We are in our own way. And we hold on to these ideas of comfort. We don't want to be uncomfortable, but we know that we can't grow. Well, what I like that my life coach says, that growth begins at the end of our comfort zone. And so the same is true for America. We must get at the end of our comfort zone and lean into some of these uncomfortable conversations. Again, it's not for the purpose of shame and blame, but it's for the purpose for our growth, for our evolution, for seeking what is that next level of elevation for us as a society. So I think the problem is us. Absolutely.
Wow. So can you tell us, how do you measure the success of DEI programs in colleges and universities?
Absolutely. I think there are lots of different ways that you can look at what is the measure of success. So first of all, And again, we did this during our first conversation. When you and I talk about DEI, we're talking about an engagement strategy that embraces all humans. So diversity simply means the sum total of all humanity. Diversity is all humans. When we talk about equity, we're talking about the removal of barriers to create maximum outcomes for all people. And when we talk about inclusion, we're talking about what is that committed action that we are intentionally focused on doing that creates pathways so that folks coming into our institutions can go as fast as they want, as high as they want, as far as they want, given their skill level and given their abilities. So that's what we're talking about. So these, and it's interesting to me how there would be people who would be against this concept, because the opposite of DEI to me is white supremacy. So when I hear all these stories about, oh, well, we're going to get rid of DEI and replace it with what? Are we going, if we insist that we're going back to white supremacy, that's not only a no, that's a hell no for me and, 33 other million people who look like me, given a Clarence Thomas or Senator Tim Scott or Candace Owens, plus or minus them. But most of us are like, what are you talking about? So I think you get to say all of the words, right? And so so for me, if DEI is an engagement strategy that reaches everyone, why wouldn't you want to have it? And I think that's feedback. And we need to really watch those folks, those institutions, those businesses, those governmental organizations who have a story or who have an approach that is different from DEI. I think it's very, very telling. And I think that we need to, again, I can't help it. I'm a PK. The word says, little children be ye deceived. God is not mocked, So we got to see exactly what we're seeing and then act on it, not give folks a pass, not explain it away. But I think we need to act on it. We need to act on it with our dollars. We need to act on it with our energy. We need to act on it with our votes. Democracy is action. Democracy is not something you can just phone in. Democracy is something that you must be. I think that there was one writer who said the vigilance is the price for freedom. Right. And so that certainly is the case. You can't just vote one time and expect, oh, things are going to be OK. You have to keep voting and stay active. And so as we talk about in the higher education space, when we look at the success of DEI initiatives, are we more inclusive than we were prior to these initiatives? Are there people at the table, qualified, powerful, engaged folks who would not have been at the table otherwise? Is the curriculum different? And are we learning more narratives than just learning about white Europeans? Are we recognizing that when Europeans arrived in America in the 15th century, there were almost 80 to 100 million people living on the North and South American continent, including the Caribbean archipelago islands and all of that? So are we aware that white people are only 7% of the global population? Are we coming from a framework that, white people, because white people are not the majority? And it's really interesting because, and as a word nerd, and I know we've talked about this before, I do not use the term minority when describing Black and brown people, because Black and brown people comprise the global majority. 90% of the global population is of color. And again, around 7% of the global population is white. So why are we acting as the white body is the archetype of humanity? Because it's not. Well, the reason that we're acting that way is because of our colonized mindsets, that when Europeans came and they spread European culture everywhere, they were very intentional about giving their colonies white God, white Jesus, and the image of the white male being the archetypal, example of what men are. And so for me, I think words definitely matter. And as a word nerd, I get to have fun in that space. But so, yes, I think that there are lots of things that we get to measure, but the overarching compass for me is, are we more inclusive? Are we more effective? And there's a wonderful concept, and it actually comes from neuroscience, and it's called generative interactivity. And these are by thought leaders who are colleagues of mine, and I embrace this research. But the concept says the more different types of individuals you have in a setting, and at different generations, different ages, different, all the different diversity dimensions. And when you empower those folks, and when you create a level playing field and give them opportunity to achieve their ultimate best, they are going to achieve far greater outcomes than if you had a similar room of all homogenous people. So this is not about do the right thing. It is do the effective thing, because when we bring more people into the setting and empower them and give them the charge of create a better world, more people who are of different perspectives and different generations and different spiritual practices are able to produce a better result than having this homogenous group of folks. And I think what we see, what is troubling, is that we see this this departure from generative interactivity, and we see this almost recentering of white supremacy, recentering of, oh, well, we just need a bunch of white people in the room, or what someone said that I read in a tweet, we need competent white men. I'm like, what the heck? We need competent people who are of all generations and all ethnicities and all genders and all orientations and all abilities to create maximum outcomes for us. And in this case, in the case of the administration, they're not even competent. So, that's a whole nother conversation.
So let me get your input on this, your thought process, because this is a follow-up to where you was just going here.
Okay.
There's been several takes as to DEI itself, who's benefiting and things of that nature as far as the country goes today. What do you say for those that are majorly saying that white women benefited more from DEI than anybody? What is your take on that?
So it's multifaceted. If you look at, for example, the number of chief diversity officers, and when I was a senior practice leader, I was a chief diversity officer. And when you looked at those chief diversity officer roles in the United States, only 4.5% to 5%, really 4%, were Black people. Mm-hmm. Okay. So 96% of those CDO positions were held by folks other than Black people. Mm-hmm. When you look at, and Charles, you and I are, I'm old enough to remember affirmative action. I believe I'm a little older than you are. And when you think about who benefited from affirmative action, that was white women, especially in corporate America, because they called them, I remember it like it was yesterday. They were called the double minority. They were minority from a standpoint of gender. And I'm like, double? White and what? But okay. But yeah, that was like the win-win. Oh, well, let's get this person. But I want to be clear. Whenever institutions and organizations embrace a DEI strategy, a meaningful DEI strategy that is built on engagement, that supports and uplifts everyone. It's not targeted at Black people, like the misinformation on certain conservative media outlets wants to portray, they made DEI literally a curse word. You're like, oh, that's a DEI hire, meaning they're Black. And so that is just evidence of anti-Blackness that has existed in the United States since the United States was before the United States was the United States. So this is something that is just a part of our historical DNA. And so we get to really fine tune between, you know, what's real and what's not. But I believe in the work that I do, when we have DEI initiatives, and either in higher education, K-12, local government, state agency, the strategies benefit everyone. Does that make sense?
Okay. And so, yeah, and so I understand that that's probably like the sole intent, right?
Right.
But I mean, but when you actually think about it, you know, like I think in most places of employment, when they, let's say, hired someone that was Black or brown, you know, that, you know, they put this little tag in their little system to state this person is hired, and they put that as in like maybe a count of some sort, or some kind of little stigma that's there that signifies either DEI or affirmative action.
Well,
one of the two.
Well, so here's my living.
And so,
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go finish your question, please.
well, no, I mean, no, that's I mean, that's pretty much the thing. So, well, how does that work?
So, in my lived experience, I have never known, and I've been in human resources for 25 years. Every time I have hired a Black or brown person in the predominantly white organizations that I've been a part of, they were head and shoulders more qualified than any other person. Period.
True.
Including myself. There's I have hired, or I have been directed to hire mediocre white men. I've never been directed to hire a mediocre Black person. That's not my experience. Maybe someone else has. I'm not saying it hasn't happened. I'm saying I've never seen it.
Right.
Because to go through all the things that we have to go through, to, you know, like people have gone over our resumes with a fine-tooth comb. They've done extensive background checks. They've done all the things. Of course we're better, because we've had to be. And even growing up, my parents and my grandparents taught me when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, look, get over yourself. You have to be twice as good to be considered for the same opportunity. And that's just how I grew up. And so as I was raising my kids, Charles, I told them the same thing. So I'm like, nobody's handing you anything. You're not only going to have to meet the minimum qualifications, you're going to have to exceed the minimum qualifications. Now, as an HR director, I can tell you, I have supported mediocre white people because I've been directed to by the CEO. I've hired people who were not qualified, and none of them were Black. But I did what a lot of people do. Where people have failed up, and this person was not good in X position, and so we're going to promote them and move them to a higher position. I've never done that for any Black or brown people, ever. So that's my lived experience. And so when people are talking about affirmative action hires, it reminds me of the book by Dr. Carter G. Woodson. And if you've never read, I'm sure you've read the book. And so for your readers, for your audience, this book was written in the 1920s or 30s, but it sounds like it was written today. The name of the book is called The Miseducation of the Negro by Dr. Carter G. Woodson. It's a fabulous treatise, and it is valuable to this very day about how we have been socialized as Black people to navigate this American experience and this American journey. And there's a section that Dr. Woodson talks about where he talks about employment opportunities for African Americans, and also how the socialization process in America is to tear down the Black leader by Black people. by having Black
Yep.
people disqualify the Black manager or supervisor. So, of course, the white people aren't going to follow them. But that's something, again, that's part of our colonized mindset that we have to literally, our minds must be decolonized, because that's a part of slavery. That's a part of the culture that existed during enslavement. And again, these systems are incredibly effective. That's why the European colonial powers use them. They're still effective to this day. And so I have seen where I've had Black managers and supervisors, and I would see how they would get more flack from Black people than white people.
Mhm.
And I would have to do interventions to support that manager or supervisor. And then, when you get right down to it, it's just a colonized mindset. So that's a part of our experience as well as Black people. And we know that we have to be beyond reproach. We know they're going to read our emails. We know we can only post certain things on social media. We know, we go into this eyes wide open. Nobody thinks that we have it to the same as our white counterparts, because we do not, and we never have. And that's just what it is. And it's just, as I tell each of my 4 children, it's like, look, these are the rules. You got to be better, so be better.
That's interesting, and all that you said, I totally agree with. I just hate the fact that just as time is passing, is that what you're starting to see again is we're seeing it's like eating yourself internally, and so you're starting to see a whole lot more of this. Pretty much where we have people that look like you and I that are actually giving the wrong people flack. Now, I understand when you look at people like Byron Donald, you look at Tim Scott, you look at Candace Owens. It's understood that, I don't know. I guess it's an understanding that these people primarily have a lot of self-hatred. They apparently don't like themselves. So because they don't like themselves, but they feel like they can get a leg up by downing others and killing the culture, this is where I think they feel like they have this leg of maybe getting more wealth just by trashing their own people.
What I think? And I'm sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So here's what I think. There are, and again, quoting scripture, there are far more of us. Greater are we than them who's in the world, right? There are far more. Like when you look at the most recent election, I am proud. Black men and Black women showed up. I don't care what conservative media is saying. Black women, 92% for Kamala Harris. Black men, in the low 90s as well. Again, we showed up for our candidate. We showed up for America. We showed up for democracy. There are those, and I'll never forget. I had a conversation. My father was a Republican, and I asked my dad. I'm like, Dad, why are you a Republican? And again, this was in the 80s, and my dad's pure and simple. He's like, you know what? I'm a businessman, and the line is shorter. I said, the line is shorter? What do you mean? He says, well, when you go to the Democratic Party, there's a lot of Black and brown people there. In the Republican Party, there are fewer. And so getting your way to the top, if you can navigate that space and place, is an easier task. Now, in order to get to the top, you must there is an element of yourself that you must disown. That's what you're talking about, the self-loathing. Again, that's a part of colonial culture. When you look at all colonized cultures throughout the world, there was this cadre of folks who leaned closer to the European power, more so to their own. And so that's what you see in Clarence Thomas and Senator Tim Scott and Byron Donald, all of those folks, because again, they derive value from being close to white power. And that recognition is powerful. I'm just grateful that for every Candace Owens, there's like 300 Amanda Seals. Shout out to Amanda Seals. I love your work. I love what you do. But again, there's some real brothers and sisters who are in this fight, who have been in this fight since before Angela Davis and James Baldwin and W.E.B. Du Bois. So we have a history of that. And because of the colonized framework in which the United States, Canada, much of the Western world is, you do have these folks who will say, I want to be close to the power. I will do whatever it takes to get there, including if that means tearing down my own or tearing down myself. Because, when you think about it logically, it is what do they call it? It's an oxymoron. Why would you, as a Black person, tear down, embrace a white man that tears down Black people? That should not be a thing. For this man to talk about and when you look at his cabinet appointments, he showed y'all exactly what he thought about y'all, because he didn't appoint any of them. So I just think that, I think it's tragic. And I am heartened, I am overjoyed that the overwhelming percentage of the diaspora knows what time it is and knows what's up and sees the shenanigans for what it is.
So can you share a success story from your time working with higher education institutions?
Of course, I can share lots of different success stories. So I'll share a couple. I was working with, and again, I'm going to shout out these institutions because they've done really good work. One such institution is a small community college in the Sierra Nevada mountain range. It's called Lassen Community College. I've been working with them, for 4 to 5 years. And they are moving the needle when it comes to equity. They recognize that diversity means everyone. They have a significant population of students who have come from the criminal justice system. And so the compassion and care and concern that they have for those students is absolutely wonderful. They have a significant group of students who are international or from other parts of the world. Again, of all the places that could come, they come to this small community college in the California Sierra Nevada, and they're able to thrive and grow and expand. And this is not in what one would call a progressive or liberal. This is not in San Francisco. This is not in LA, right? Where you would think, oh, those are liberal areas. No, this is in a seemingly what they would identify it as a conservative area. And yet the work of equity and inclusion is alive and well. I've done some wonderful work at Southwestern Community College in Chula Vista in San Diego. Again, they're doing some wonderful, amazing things. I'm working right now with UC Berkeley and UCLA. They're doing some fabulous things. I'm working with Alliant International University, which is a for-profit university, and they specialize in a lot of graduate and professional school programs. And I'm doing work with them right now, again, in creating equitable and safe places for students and faculty to have crucial conversations about what's going on in the world and what is the best way for these students and faculty members to meet the challenge and meet it in a way that allows for greater empathy and understanding and connection one with another, while at the same time standing for justice, standing for the rights of the oppressed. I've done some wonderful work with Mission College in the San Francisco Bay Area. They're actually in Santa Clara, California. And beginning last fall semester, we were facilitating conversations between Muslim students and faculty and Jewish students and faculty with the backdrop of the Israel-Hamas conflict to try to create greater understanding and awareness and connection between those two distinct groups. So I think there's a lot of great things going on in higher education, Charles, and I really enjoy the work that I'm doing in the higher education space. So lots of good things going on. And again, I think because higher education because it's a knowledge-based culture, and they are true to their mission. At least in the states that I'm working in, I see a doubling down, if you will, of principles of equity and inclusion. I see standing for all humanity, and that's really heartening to see, because you don't always hear that in the news. I know I don't watch the news that much. When I do watch the news, there are lots of negative stories about, all of these horrible things going on, and folks aren't they're not sharing, even in this time and in this culture, all the great things that are going on nationally.
So, what strategies do you recommend for fostering an inclusive campus environment?
Fostering an inclusive camp. So the strategy, again, great question. It's multi-pronged and multifaceted. It begins with the awareness of who's on our campus and who's not on our campus. Oftentimes, and I do this in trainings, when we're talking about the importance of emotional intelligence and situational awareness, when we're working with teams, are we aware of who's here, but more importantly, who's not here? And why aren't those voices here? It is not, meritocracy is a myth. So if they're not here, what can we do to get those bright voices present? Because trust and believe, we're missing something without having those stories, without having those voices. So I think that's a critically important first step. I also think that it's all about creating. This work is it's another reflection of change management. It literally, we are changing culture, right? And that's not done with the stroke of a pen. That's not done with a series of executive actions. That's done doing the heavy lifting, walking the walk, talking the talk. It is longitudinal, it is ongoing, it is continuous. And so wherever we have the support for that type of work so that it can be ongoing and continuous, I think we're going to see great success. If we don't properly resource these initiatives, resources in terms of people, resources in terms of dollars, resources in terms of tools, then this is not going to be a sustainable initiative.
So let's transition over to local government.
Okie doke.
And so tell us, what are the key DEI challenges you faced by the local government today?
So same as in higher education, really. American culture and us getting in our own way. And also I think there's a lot of energy that's coming from Washington, D.C. right now, and it has certainly been inconsistent with the American narrative. Even under Reagan, Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, and W. The American narrative is that we are creating opportunity for everyone. This resurgence of white supremacy and what we're seeing now, we haven't really heard this language since before segregation, right? For those of us in the South, we may have heard it sooner, but this is language that really harkens back to, prior to the Civil Rights Act and the major federal civil rights legislation. So, but again, many of us who are alive, we've seen that before. But I think in the local governments, having this inconsistency, and folks who work in local government, whether it's California, Colorado, Texas, Florida, the Mid-Atlantic, New York, these folks are committed to their communities. They genuinely care. They lead with heart. They want to do the right thing, which is serve the community. And having these narratives now come out of Washington, D.C., that is inconsistent with what many of us know and believe to be true, has created some disruption. So one of the things that we're doing now is we're really working a lot with local government leaders, city councils, board of supervisors, city managers, mayors, HR directors, other folks, to really have conversations that remind us of what our core vision always was. Washington's going to do what Washington needs to do, but that there is a unique mission that local government entities have that they've always had. And there's unique connections and there's unique opportunities that local governments have. So I really think that we're going to see a lot more activity on the local government front, because folks so far, because Washington is so disjointed and dysfunctional that folks are going to lean to the governments that they're closer to, and that often is the local government. So I'm really encouraged. I'm really encouraged about what I'm seeing in local government. I'm encouraged about the work that I'm doing there, and that's going to continue. That's definitely going to continue.
So, with these times now, especially, we're coming up now, going into the first 90 days of this new administration. When it comes to a lot of the local governments, I don't think a lot of them are actually standing up and doing their due diligence, because I can understand, when some of these policies have to go into place. Do you think that maybe from a regional perspective, that maybe these policies that should include equity and inclusion is this just a regional thing as to how effective it can be, or if they still believe in it?
So I am very pleased to say, and I can say wholeheartedly, every local government that I work with in all the states that I named are wholeheartedly committed to the principles of equality, equity, inclusion, diversity. And they absolutely know their mission, and they have the knowledge of knowing how government operates. I think what we see in Washington, D.C., are people who are coming into government who don't know how government functions. The folks at the local government level are experts at knowing how government runs. And so, Charles, I just can't, that hasn't been my experience, where folks do not understand their role. In fact, the local governments I am familiar with, California, Colorado, Texas, Florida, the Mid-Atlantic, they absolutely understand their role. They absolutely understand the three branches of government. They absolutely understand how government works. And they're absolutely committed to the principles of equity, equality, and inclusion. Now, there may be, I am sure that there are governments who are siding with the current presidential administration. I'm just not working with them, and they're not here in California or Colorado. So I just can't speak to that. In fact, if anything, I can speak to the local government leaders in California and Colorado and Maryland, the Mid-Atlantic, who are champions of these principles. And that's not going away, period.
So, how can local governments create more inclusive policies and practices?
Well, I think, again, many local governments have inclusive policies and practices because they have to. Because, in that city, they have or that county, they have an obligation to serve everyone. Now, am I naive enough to say that, hey, in some, are there some local government jurisdictions where they're not doing that? I am not that naive, but I'm telling you my lived experience, and the local governments that I am in partnership with fully understand their ethical responsibilities, their legal responsibilities. They understand it more than the folks in Washington, D.C., and they're not wavering. Now, one of the things that is disconcerting for many of these local governments, they don't know what are going to be the repercussions yet from the administrations if they hold fast to the profession of their faith. Let me say it like that. But I see no local governments that I'm working with wavering. I think that they are being artful in style flexing, if you will, so that they're not going to cut off their nose to spite their face, but at the same time, they are not going to abandon those principles that they know to be true and dear and meaningful to the community. Yeah, that's just
So,
not, and I can tell you that's just not going to happen in California. That's not going to happen in Colorado, and there in certain states where that's never going to happen. It's just I just cannot foresee. I cannot reasonably foresee where local governments in these jurisdictions will abandon what they know to be true. I just don't see that.
can you share an example of a successful DEI initiative in a local government setting?
I can share several. So again, one success story is City of North Glen, Colorado. I've been working with North Glen since 2021. North Glen is in suburban Denver, Colorado. They have an amazing local government leader in their city manager who happens to be female. She's been their city manager for 6 years. She's been in local government for 30 years. They have an amazing HR director who happens to be female, who happens to be African American. They have an amazing mayor who happens to be female also. And these women are absolutely committed to the principles of equity and inclusion. And these women are leading this local government to do more and greater and more impactful things for the community while bringing everyone along, right? And that's a really tall task to do when you have divergent interests. Again, that you've got lots of people in the community. You have no two people with the same worldview or lived experience. So you've got all these opinions. And I think that these three women in particular are very, very artful at threading the needle and leading folks through the path of least resistance. And so it's been a pleasure and delight working with them. I've done a lot of work in other jurisdictions in Colorado, City of Loveland, Colorado, for example. We did back in 2022, 2023, we did some amazing, like year-long initiatives, training and development, doing coaching, creation of employee resource groups, creation of other opportunities that folks get to be their authentic self. And it's still, the initiative is still ongoing. They're doing some wonderful things. There are folks in Durango, Colorado, Aspen, Colorado. Again, lots of different jurisdictions that I've been blessed to work with, who are doing some fabulous work and really moving the needle in spite of and because of. And it's just, for me, it's exciting to be a part of. I get to feel like I'm making a difference in being in partnership with them, and just having people who care about creating a better world for the next generation. I see that at the local government level. It's real, it's meaningful, it's tangible, and it's a beautiful experience.
Well, that's a lead in to this next question here, and that is, how do you engage community members in DEI efforts within the local government?
Purely and simply, meeting people where they are. It's interesting, Charles, because I am an educator, I'm a teacher, I'm a professor, and when I'm doing engagement work, I put all that to the side, and I come as my authentic self, and I listen more than I talk. You know that saying, we got 2 ears, 1 mouth, so we need to hear twice as much as we speak. So I take that to heart. Mm-hmm. I really take to heart the tools of Crucial Conversations. Crucial Conversations is a communication strategy that talks about, you're not communicating for advocacy, you're not communicating to be right, you're communicating for understanding, you're communicating to meet people where they are. And in the local government space, the most effective way to have that type of engagement is when you're not coming from advocacy, You're coming from awareness. You're coming from understanding. You're coming from a standpoint of cultural humility. Cultural humility says, I don't know what I don't know yet. So I'm going to hold space for those things that I don't know. I'm going to come in as a student. I'm going to come in because I want to learn, because I want to understand. And I want to understand why you speak the way you do, why you move and act the way you do. What are your, your pleasure points and your pain points? I get to understand that, and I get to be a student of that process. And I think whenever we come from that perspective, it's it's always more as opposed to coming in with advocacy. I'm gonna tell you you're right and you're wrong, and we're gonna do it this way, and we're gonna, because you don't know. You don't know until you know. And so that's why everyone on my team has been trained in the Crucial Conversations protocol. We insist on having a high degree of both cultural intelligence and emotional intelligence whenever we're facilitating these types of conversations, because that's really important. If you come in and Charles, I've had some funny stories where we've been the consulting team that came in to clean up the work from the first team. And the first team would come in and tell people they're wrong and they're racist and they're this and that, and got everybody mad and walking out of trainings and stuff. And I was like, oh, Lord Jesus. So we have to come in and we have to be repairers of the breach. We have to come in and heal those hurts and still move the ball forward. So and that really is one of our superpowers. It's not something that we intended. It's just something that kind of happened. And so we really lean into that superpower, and that makes it a fun experience.
So can you tell us, what role does cultural intelligence play in managing conflicts within local governments?
So I believe that cultural intelligence, and cultural intelligence, as we are aware, is an extension of emotional intelligence. The simple definition for cultural intelligence is having the capacity to relate to or work with different types of people across different cultures. And culture, in this standpoint, doesn't mean race, ethnicity, or national origin. When we talk about cultural, in this sense, we're really looking through the anthropological lens, because we're talking about people. This is human intelligence. I think you cannot do this work unless you have a high degree of emotional and cultural intelligence. We know that cultural intelligence is an extension of emotional intelligence. There are 5 pillars of emotional intelligence. The same 5 pillars are reflective in cultural intelligence: that self-awareness, social or situational awareness, relationship skills, that co-regulation, and responsible decision-making. You have those same things present. So if we are not, basically what all this is, fancy words for saying, if we are not in touch with ourselves as people, we cannot effectively engage with other people. And we certainly can't come together as a team of people to move forward with a common goal and effective communication. You must have all of those present if you want to create success.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So in that instance, let me just ask you, when engaging, especially out in communities, when dealing with the local governments and so forth, how much do you guys do when you come across some individuals? Do you guys help them to learn a little bit more about critical thinking, or do you look at people's critical thinking and realize that sometimes they're missing the mark because they're just simply not getting it?
Or the third option, and there are lots of options, because it's both of those things, actually, Charles. So we like to pursue, in Buddhism, they call this the third higher path. Where can we find common ground in meeting you where you are? Now, when you talk about community engagement, there's certain projects that we do that are focused on community. Some of them are in the community, but they're really done by the city council or a community relations board or something of that nature. So it depends on the nature of the work. But we start it all the same, which is we must listen and learn twice as much as we speak, because everybody has their own story, right? And when we're at like a community event and people are sharing, or, you know, we listen. We listen without judgment. It's important to listen to understand so that we can meet folks where they are. So oftentimes I don't like to do a lot of education in public settings because, you know, everybody went to school, so everybody thinks that they're an educational expert. And most people don't know that they don't know what the real answer is. You know, again, you talk to some well-meaning people, they are misguided and their history is wrong, but we would never tell them that in the space and time that we're in. It's all about us engaging them where they are, us understanding where they're coming from, so then we can support the local government. And how do we appropriately respond to those issues, those concerns, those conversation pieces? And we would probably, in response to that, we would have an educational offering, but it's not about teaching in public, because that, for me and my team, has not been effective. We get to do education in education spaces. We get to do engagement in engagement spaces, if that makes sense.
Okay. So let's transition over to the community. Okay. So tell us, how can communities foster a culture of inclusion and belonging?
Communities must understand that the strength of the community is based on the strength of every single person in that community, regardless. And if a community is thriving and healthy, it will be dynamic. It will be supportive. It will be one which will foster learning and growing. It also recognizes there are multiple ways of doing things. And so when you have a community where all that is present, you have the makings of some really dynamic work that can take place. When, on the other hand, you have a community that embraces a single story narrative where there's only one truth and it's this, and all those things, all the other things are not there, then that community has not created growth space. That community is based in a fundamentalist philosophy, and the opposite of fundamentalism is creativity. So if you want creative, free-flowing environments and communities, then you must be very intentional about supporting those elements that create that type of dynamic atmosphere and that type of dynamic environment. And it comes from a recognition that, and again, I know the current defense secretary scoffs at this statement, but I believe that this statement is a hallmark of healthy people and healthy communities. And that is the statement: diversity is our strength. It is our strength, recognizing the full depth and breadth of the human experience, and recognizing that looking at that entire depth and breadth together make us better, more effective, more engaged, more connected. How could you not embrace diversity? So that's important, that communities allow for the free flowing of ideas. And let me say this, and that even includes, and we model this. Even we go into communities, and I'll say communities here in California, and there's certain communities that are very embracing of anti-racism, right? What can we affirmatively do so we can end racism? There's some people within those same communities, it's like, well, I think you're going too far. You know, we're not racist, and so why should we do things that are anti-racist because we're not, you know, they get in their feelings about the words. So healthy communities allow for dialogue along the full spectrum. There are folks who are going to agree. there are folks who are not going to agree. But do we allow a safe space that every individual gets to share their perspective and belief? And that's why we say for our work, agreement is not required. Agreement is not relevant. What we're seeking is alignment, not agreement. And again, for word nerds, nuanced distinction between the two. Agreement is I agree with every single thing you say. Alignment is I recognize that we come from different perspectives and we may not even see things the same way. But for the purpose of moving the organization forward, I can partner with you, Charles. You can partner with me, and together we can move the organization together. That's what the concept of alignment is. And that's why we believe that alignment is more effective than agreement.
Okay. So, what role do community leaders play in advancing DEI?
Again, the community leaders must have an understanding of what DEI is. DEI is maximum engagement. When those community leaders embrace that definition of DEI, that diversity is the sum total of all humanity, that equity is about the removal of barriers to create maximum outcomes for all people, and that inclusion is action that brings everyone into the organization and allows folks to excel and move forward at their own pace and speed. When communities embrace that, those communities are going to be destination centers. People are going to thrive there. Therefore, they're going to be coming there en masse. And you can see there's certain communities around the country that reflect that. People are moving there by the droves because the arts flourish, the economy flourishes. There's housing diversity, there's cultural diversity, there's arts and entertainment. There are all these things. And we see communities around the country that do not embrace these concepts. And people are not flocking, or all people aren't flocking there. Maybe a certain type of individual may, but that's not where freedom doesn't live there. And I don't have to agree with everyone for me to get along. I mean, I've had these neighbors in my cul-de-sac for the last 12, 13, 14 years. I have Hispanic neighbors, I have white neighbors, I have Asian neighbors, I have Jewish neighbors, I have Muslim neighbors. Again, I don't have to agree with everything they agree with, but we come together for the purpose of creating a wonderful neighborhood, and it works. And I think that we have to get over this. And again, this is a theme from colonialism. This is a theme of white supremacy. This is a theme that's reflected in white transatlantic Christianity. That, I don't want to, if they're not Christian, I don't want them to be my neighbor. What? I just think that is not sound thinking. And we have folks, I grew up with well-meaning folks who believed that. I just happen not to believe that. And I think what we have now with this new administration and a recentering around white supremacy, white Christianity, that is now calling into question people of other faiths and cultures who are not white and Christian. I think that is a very unhealthy and unwise philosophy because it doesn't bring us together. It is not our best. And I just think that it creates a whole host of problems and traumas that don't move us forward, that don't bring us together, that just continue to exacerbate a problem.
Can you share an example of a successful community-based DEI initiative?
Yes, I can. So I worked with the city of Martinez, California, which is in the East Bay, the East San Francisco Bay. And that community was brave enough after George Floyd to actually put together, and it's called the ARDPI, Anti-Racism and Discrimination Pro-Equity and Inclusion Task Force. And I worked with that task. I helped put the task force together, worked with the task force, and we created a roadmap for the city of Martinez. We did a number of community events within the city, really seeking the input from the community about what type of community did the community want. I'm so pleased and so grateful that so many people from the community came out to, we had 3 or 4 community events. They came out, they shared their opinions, they shared their experiences. We also had a Spanish language interpreter for one of our outreach events. It was a wonderful, and we presented our findings to the city council, and mayor and city council, based on those findings, created, they incorporated that into the strategic plan, and now they're moving forward with a lot of those recommendations, and it's been wonderful. Was there complete agreement all the way across? Of course not. Did we take into account all the voices? Of course. That's what creates, that's what democracy is. Democracy can be messy sometimes, but very, very necessary, especially for a free and fair society. So yeah, it was a fantastic, overwhelming success. I really enjoyed working with the community and city council and members from the city of Martinez. They're awesome folks.
So how can communities address systemic inequalities and promote social justice?
Ooh, difficult question. Communities must be brave enough to allow all voices to be heard, even voices that they don't agree with. And sometimes governments and nonprofits, organizations are more adept at doing this than community members themselves. Because as a community member, you're coming from, most oftentimes you're coming from your perspective. You care about other folks, but what you really want is your stuff to get done, right? So I think the community plays a role. The community gets to be a partner with the city council, the board of supervisors, or county commissioners, with elected or appointed officials. I think the community must stay engaged, must hold the local government, be it city, county, municipality, hold them accountable. But I think that their role is as an engaged partner and participant. I think the driver of this gets to be the local government themselves. And I think, again, it's the community gets to ask and answer the question, what type of community do you want to live in? What type of world do you wish to create? Do you want to create a world where everyone gets to thrive, or a world in which only the people you like, who pray the same way you do, who look the same way you do, who are the same color, who are the same ethnicity, who speak the same language that you do thrive? I think if your question is the latter, you get to do a little more work on you because it's not about us. I think if your answer is the former, I think you're well on your way to creating this aspirational and inclusive community.
So would you attribute that to tribalism? Because I think for most folk, it's always comfortable for what's in the tribe. Now, it's not necessarily, a bad thing to go outside the tribe, but I think tribalism has become more so like a thing now these past 15 to 20 years.
Charles, when I hear the term tribalism, I don't disagree. First of all, I don't disagree. I think tribalism to me has more negative connotations. Where where I think the optimum place to be is where I am a community member with a global vision. And I recognize that my community is strong because my community is incredibly diverse, because my community has all types of voices represented, all types of genders, all ages, all ethnicities, all national origins, all languages, all abilities represented in the conversation. I think whenever we have that, we have healthier communities. I think when we do, and you're right, the tribalism and nativism we've seen probably since, I would say it started the early 2000s. We started seeing this, what President Obama calls this sifting and sorting. Because once upon a time, you had conservative Democrats and liberal Republicans. I can remember Jack Kemp, very liberal Republican. I can remember conservative Democrats. Where I remember pro-choice Republicans. That was a thing. I remember pro-life Democrats. That was a thing. And that we don't see that as much anymore, because this great sifting and sorting occurred where people are in these camps that refer, so that tribal element, as you referred to it. I think that is not a healthy approach to a pluralistic, multicultural, multiracial democracy like what we have. And people, they couch tribalism in different terms. They'll call it, oh, well, I'm just, living for the, they'll use religion, they'll use patriotism. But for me, it's just a poor disguise for racism. It's a poor disguise for exclusion. And I think it has no place in a modern society. It is hard. It is really hard. Let me say it one more time for the people in the virtual back. It's hard to live in a pluralistic society where you're elevating all voices. It's very difficult, but absolutely necessary. And I think the people who lean into it's hard work would support the 47th president of the United States. Yeah, it's hard work. Let's just go back to, let's let white people be in charge. Or let's let, like even saying, because again, gender expression, you and I both know that gender is a social construct. And many people think the gender conversations are new. They're not. Gender expression, gender fluidity is as old as humanity itself. Even among indigenous cultures, we were not taught this in grade school. Many of us had to learn it on our own. But we now know that indigenous cultures in the Americas, trans folks were referred to as two-spirit, and they were the most revered folks in the tribe. They had, almost deity status, right? They were revered, they were honored. That wasn't a point of shame. It wasn't until colonialism and white transatlantic Christianity came in and made those things bad or dirty. So I think the solution, it is difficult and it is necessary. And that is, we must hold space for others, for other people, for other perspectives, for other positions that are not like our own. And if we don't do that, we don't do it at our own peril.
So we're going to move to this final part here, which is the thing that I wanted to make sure that I get covered here in this episode. And that is, we know that it's Black History Month. And when I reached out to you earlier and I asked you about your influence, and you responded to let me know that your grandmother, Ida Van Smith, has been the most influential person in your life and your career when it comes to Black history.
Without question.
So can you tell us, how did your grandmother Ida inspire your career in DEI and business consulting?
My grandmother is a fearless force of nature. She's technically short. She was short. She was like 5. So I'm 6'2", so she was probably 5'5", 5'6". But she was a giant. My grandmother was raised by her Scottish Irish father and her African American grandmother, or African American mother. So her dad was Scottish Irish, her mom is African American. Her father raised her like a white man in the South. So my grandmother feared no one. And in fact, there was a point in time, because the world was the way it was, where my grandmother, as well as my great uncle and my great aunt, were part of the Great Migration because they had to leave the South themselves, they being biracial and the target of foolishness and shenanigans. So my grandmother and my great aunt moved to New York City, and my great uncle moved to Southern California. And they each, all three of them, were very, very successful in their own right. My great uncle went on to work for Hughes Aircraft, and then later became a real estate. He and his wife had a thriving real estate business and are contributed to integrating the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles, California. But my grandma was a New York City teacher, and her entire life she wanted to fly. And my great grandpa used to take her to the barnstorming shows back in the day. You go to the county fair and they'd have all these aerial acrobatics. And my grandmother said, Papa, one day I want to fly a plane. And my great grandpa responded, and one day you will. There isn't anything that you can't do that you want to do. And so in 1967, when my grandmother was diagnosed with cancer, my grandmother told the doctors, and they wanted to do, chemo or whatever the treatment was back then in the 60s. And my grandmother's like, yeah, not so much. I'm not doing this cancer thing. I don't have time for that. And my grandmother said, well, if her life was going to be over, then she wanted to do something that really mattered. And what really mattered to her was getting her pilot's license. So in 1967, my grandmother became a licensed pilot. Not only that, she also became a flight instructor because my grandmother wanted to teach other Black people, especially Black and brown women, how to fly planes. I remember flying in planes lots of times with my grandmother. My grandmother had a cable television show in New York City. And so I got to experience things as a young child that I would have never experienced if it wasn't for her. The first time I went to Europe, my grandmother, I shared with you, I was an exchange student to Finland. My grandma paid for that. When I went to France, my grandma paid for that. She was my champion. And so every time I move with homage and celebration and gratitude for my grandmother, because I know I stand on her shoulders. And most importantly, Mommy Smith was fearless. She wasn't afraid of anybody or anything. And I loved the way she spoke truth, period. And so, yes, of course, it serves as an inspirational model to me and for everyone. And let's see, and my grandmother was in her 50s when she got her pilot's license. So she wasn't like in her 30s. So she was grown. Again, I was her. I'd have to do the math, but yeah, she was my grandmommy. She was Mommy Smith. And I remember when she flew her plane down to Lumberton, North Carolina. That's where we lived, and that's where I grew up. And it was like literally everybody in the airport came out to see this Black woman land the plane. And I remember being with her where people would question, was that really her flying the plane or not? And I remember one day we were flying from North Carolina to New York. We stopped in Washington, Reagan, it wasn't Reagan then, it was just DC National Airport. And typically the big plane, you have to wait for all the big planes to take off. But there was this big 747, and he said, and I remember I was in the cockpit with my grandma, so I was She was in the, the driver's side. I was in the passenger side. And I remember this pilot saying, "Oh, no, 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 we'll wait. This I gotta see." And my grandmother like took off flawlessly, like she always did. And that's my life. Like I lived that. How freaking cool is that? And today she's honored at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. And yeah, my family is Black history. My grandmother is Black history. And I am so grateful and so humbled and so honored to be a part of that legacy. And it is my reasonable service and my obligation to do the work that I do, because everyone needs to know, especially all Black and brown and indigenous children and children everywhere need to know their value, need to know their worth, need to know that they are loved and they are capable of absolutely anything and everything they put their mind to it. And that's what my grandmother represents.
So what lessons did you learn from your grandmother that you apply to your professional life?
Everything I just said. Number one, fear no one and fear nothing. That if any person has figured out the thing, all I need to see is somebody do it. If anyone else can do it, I know I can do it. I'm capable of greatness. And there isn't anything that I can't do.
Wow.
And she instilled that in us from a very early age. It's the way I move now. Yeah.
So can you share a specific memory of your grandmother that had a profound impact on you?
Yes. I remember when my grandmother introduced me to one of her sorority sisters, who was a congresswoman in Jamaica, New York, who was running for president. And her name was Shirley Chisholm. And like I knew everybody, like like all the old great Adam Clayton Powell, and all these old, more seasoned, iconic people, Jesse Jackson. Like that's just how she moved. And but no, meeting Shirley Chisholm and seeing Shirley Chisholm run for president, and I think it was 1972 or 74. 72. And I remember having a Shirley Chisholm for president button. And I remember wearing that to school. And I also remember getting detention because my teacher, who was a nun, I went to Catholic school, said that if I was supporting a Negro woman as president, clearly I must be a communist.
Oh.
So, yeah, you can't make this up. But this is the world that we grew up in, Charles. I mean, that was our generation in the South. So my mother and my grandmother later gave Sister Mary Joachim a nice life lesson. Because my grandma was not to be
How did your grandmother's work in aviation and education influence your approach to DEI?
It influenced my approach to life, not just DEI. And so for me, I move in power. I move knowing my worth. I move knowing my value. I move knowing that my words have meaning and import. I remember when she used to say, there was a cadence or mantra that Jesse Jackson, Operation Push, used to say, "I am somebody," and she used to make us say that as kids, like me and all my little cousins, and she meant that. I remember flashcards that my grandmother would give us, like for Black history, because we weren't learning Black history in school. So I learned about Dr. Benjamin Banneker, and I learned about Madam C.J. Walker, and I learned about W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington and Marcus Garvey. And, she had flashcards because she was a teacher. So she would always, challenge us. So again, the other thing, if you ever talk to any of my family, ex-wife, kids, they'll tell you, I know so much trivia. But the reason I know so much trivia is because we used to get quizzed on stuff like that. And I would always want to, I would always want to get the gold star from Mommy Smith, from my grandmother. So that's the way I move, not just with DEI, but that's the way I move in general. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Honestly.
So our final question for you is, what values did your grandmother instill in you that guide your work today?
Oh, I am possible.
Mm-hmm.
I am capable of anything I put my mind to. And that nothing is beyond my reach, period. Absolutely nothing.
So in closing, for those that you have inspired with your wonderful words today and all this wisdom, all these nuggets that you have dropped, what would you like to leave with our audience today, as well as, if you want to leave them your social handles, how to contact you on the website? What are some of the things you'd like for them to know for this evening?
So I would leave them with the knowledge that each one of your audience members are incredible, amazing human beings. They have so many gifts and talents and abilities that are just waiting to burst at the seams. And all they need to do, the only thing that's required is that they show up and believe in themselves. And instead of focusing on what they think they can't do or what may go wrong, what if they change that narrative to say, what can go right? What can I do today to change my life and to change the world? The world changers aren't these, Barack and Michelle Obama are awesome. And the people who are going to change the world are everyday people. A lot of times people want to disqualify themselves and say, oh, I don't have this platform, I don't have this many followers, or I'm not rich, I'm not famous, I didn't go to an Ivy League school, I didn't go to Howard University, or whatever the case may be. But there is greatness, there is incredible greatness in each and every one of us. And the only thing that's required is that we believe in us and we show up. And so that's what I would leave your audience. Your audience is amazing. It's good to be back with you. I'm on LinkedIn. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Jacques Whitfield on LinkedIn. I believe you have to correct me if I'm wrong, Charles. But yeah, please feel free to share my my LinkedIn link on your on your platforms. I love to talk about everything. So if anyone wants to reach out please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Again, Jacques Whitfield. And I answer every message. And again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for inviting me back. I always love hanging out with you, Charles. You ask such thought-provoking questions. You really make a brother think. And so this was fun. The time has flown so quickly. I just looked down at the clock. I'm like, wow, we've been talking this long. But yeah, thank you so much. And this was a joy and a delight. And happy Black History Month. And let's keep the faith. And as Jesse Jackson said, keep hope alive, because we're definitely going to need it during these very interesting times.
Well, I want to say to you, Jacques, it's always a pleasure. And I want you to know that, just like the last time, your show is always full of knowledge. It's always full of the nuggets that people need to have. These are the things that I want people to get, because I do want people to get the idea or the understanding, shall I say, of what it is to think about what's most important and how to rationalize the decisions that you make. I think for those that have made the decisions that they made, that has put us in a position that we're in right now. Of course, we know there are no takeys back, but I'm more than sure that now people can understand now, as you clearly broke down DEI and what it stands for and what it's supposed to be about. If nobody has taken anything from this message, something's wrong. I appreciate guests like yourself, because when you share this kind of knowledge, which is what not most people want us to share, which, hey, they cannot want this all they want, but it's what I want, and this is what the people want and need. And this is why people like you are so important. I can never say enough thank yous and how much I appreciate you for being here. And we definitely have got to have you back, because there were so many questions that I had that I'm not able to ask, but I definitely would love to have you back.
Well, thank you so much. Invite me anytime, and I would love to be back on anytime. Again, you're amazing, Charles. Thank you so much for your gracious hospitality, and thank you to all your listeners again. And I will see you soon.
Yeah, and for those of you that are watching on the YouTube channel, if you have not yet, please hit the subscriptions and notifications button, because you will be able to watch each and every show live when it's about to take place, or you're able to go back and watch every show that's already been previously done, and you can give us your feedback as much as you'd like. So if you have not, please go to the YouTube channel, subscribe, hit the notifications button, and please join us for all of our shows. And I want to thank everybody for watching us tonight with this great show. We have another great show for you tomorrow night. Again, thank you, Jacques, and thank everybody for being here. We will see you guys tomorrow evening, same time, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.